And now, please stand for our national anthem, performed by multi-platinum recording artist Billy Gilman.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please welcome the groundbreaking star of Pose and American Horror Story, and a force in the fight for equality, Angelica Ross.
Good evening, Iowa! Yeah! Yes, and hi, America, and to everyone watching at home. Welcome to Cole College and the LGBTQ Presidential Forum. Yes. Presented by the Advocate, the Gazette, One Iowa, and GLAAD. I am Angelica Ross, if you don't know. I'm an actress, an entrepreneur, an activist, and a military veteran, and I am a voter. Also proud to be hosting this historic event, which happens to be taking place during Bisexual Plus Awareness Week, y'all. When we celebrate bi plus people and their resiliency. Now, the first forum of the 2020 presidential campaign dedicated exclusively to LGBTQ issues. What better place than to do it right here in Iowa? Yeah. Where the road to the White House will begin for one of these candidates. Tonight we are streaming on YouTube, and we encourage you here in the room and at home, and those watching online, to use the hashtag LGBTQ Forum. Follow at GLAAD and Angelica Ross, and share your favorite clips too. Let's get the LGBTQ Forum hashtag trending, okay? Because we need our issues and our stories out there. One of the reasons I'm here tonight is because the Trump administration is harming transgender Americans. So let's just review, why don't we, just a handful of those moves. The administration moved to revoke trans health care, discrimination protections. They made it more difficult for homeless trans people to access shelters. And Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, however you say her name, her decision to stop investigating the complaints of trans students hurts trans students across the country, when Secretary DeVos should be helping to make sure every student can learn and flourish. simple. I'm also here because I want to make sure America understands that Black trans lives matter. Yeah, go on, stand up for that. Black trans lives matter. Absolutely. Now, just last week, Colette, a Black mother in Chicago, messaged me in a panic. Her Black trans daughter, Skylar, suffers from severe mental illness. And in America, Black people with mental illness are often seen as a threat. So Skylar has been placed in a men's prison where she is being raped and abused by guards and inmates. Colette is terrified for her child, for her physical and mental well-being. So I want to know, how is our next president going to protect Black trans folks? That's what I want to know. 19 lives lost is one too many. America deserves better, and we must do better. To all the trans and gender diverse people here or watching at home who have been hurt by the hate, you are beautiful. You are worthy. And we will not stop until you too have access to the American dream. We all should have access to the American dream. Now let's get started. Organizers of this event have extended invites to all 2020 candidates. Just want to say that. We did not let poll numbers limit us. I'll let all of you ask the questions who are not here why they skipped out. Is it ain't important enough? So I want you all to ask your candidates, because we should have a relationship, right? Ask them. I want to know. I know you want to know. Why ain't you here? So when you ask that, go ahead and go to Twitter and just remember, use the hashtag LGBTQ Forum. How about that? So first, please let me welcome to the stage one of the great leaders of our LGBT community. Wherever you see big things happening in the media that change the culture, like tonight's forum, you'll find GLAAD behind the scenes. Put your hands together for GLAAD's CEO, president, and my girlfriend, Sarah K. Ellis. Where you at, girl?
Hi.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm great.
You're amazing.
Thank
Hi.
you.
Hi. What a thrill to be
Isn't it
here.
great?
It's an absolute thrill. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Angelica. And I'd like to thank the Advocate, the Gazette, and One Iowa for joining GLAAD to host this historic night. We're doing this first. We're talking to the candidates one-on-one on what they think about the LGBTQ community and what they're going to do for us. This couldn't come at a better time. First of all, this race for presidency has been going on and on and on, and it's more important now than ever for the LGBTQ community. Since Donald Trump took office, GLAAD's Trump Accountability Project has shown 125 attacks against our community. That's in policy and rhetoric, 125 attacks against us. These attacks range from removing LGBTQ people from the 2020 census, so we've been removed, to banning trans military service members from serving our country. He even supports allowing business owners to deny my wife, my children, and me access and service. Yes. In just a couple of short weeks, the Supreme Court of the United States will hear one of the most important cases of our lives, And make no mistake, firing someone just for being LGBTQ should not be up for debate. No way, no how. We can't let them win. We must fight back, and we will. It's time to pass the Equality Act and ban so-called conversion therapy. It's time to end the epidemic of violence against our community, especially Black trans women. Yes. And you know what? It's time to have a president, once again, who is leading the way on equality and acceptance, not standing in the way of equality and acceptance. Let's also, I want to be really clear about this too. Our community is impacted by other critical issues in this presidential race. When you try to repeal the Affordable Care Act, you hurt LGBTQ people and who need vital medical services. When you try to build a wall, you hurt LGBTQ immigrants and asylum seekers. When you try to take away reproductive freedom, you take it away from all of us, including LGBTQ people. So to this date, the 2020 Democratic debates have virtually left LGBTQ people and our issues out of the conversation. But that all changes tonight, and you're here for it. GLAAD is on the front lines to give LGBTQ people a voice. That's our job. And that is why we ask the public to submit questions for this event, many of which you will hear tonight on this stage. So thank you for being here. Thank you for watching out there. And now, to kick it off, please welcome to the stage the editor-in-chief and my friend of the Advocate, Zach Stafford.
Oh my God. Hi, Iowa. Y'all look so good tonight. I love seeing y'all, and I love the Midwest as someone that lived in it for about 9 years, so it's so good to see all your faces. My name is Zach Stafford, and I'm the editor-in-chief of The Advocate, the world's longest-running LGBTQ magazine that has ever existed, and that is amazing tonight. And we are a paper and a magazine that has been around to report on police brutality in the 60s, the Stonewall riots, and we were there during the AIDS crisis to report in the field and make sure that you knew what was happening to your lives. We are so excited and so honored tonight to have 10 candidates take the stage to talk about issues that matter most to all of us. And before we jump in, I'd like to thank Coe College for having us. It has been such a pleasure having us here. And I must say, you know, as an editor, I'm supposed to be, my mic keeps going back and forth. My mic is excited tonight. But my mic, and I want to say, you know, as a gay man who's not an editor, I'm going to say something very subjective. You know, it has hurt not to see LGBTQ matters, topics discussed in these presidential elections, in these Democratic debates so far. And tonight we're changing that, and that's with your help. So thank you so much for doing that. All right, so who's ready to get started? Y'all ready? All right, please help me welcome to the stage Marianne Williamson. All right. Before we take a seat, I'm going to ask Ms. Williamson one question that I think is very important, and you're going to hear this question a lot tonight. It is, in the first 100 days of your presidency, what can LGBTQ people expect to see happen?
Well, I will speak very loudly. Oh, I'm supposed to tell you? Or, no. I will speak very loudly about the Equality Act. I will speak about banning conversion therapy. I will repeal the ban on transgender in the military. But I will do a whole lot more than that, and I'd like to talk to you right now about what that will be. In order to do that, though, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about my own history with what was for me when I was a younger woman called the gay community, today LGBTQIA+. But when I was a younger woman, we were talking about the gay community, we were talking about gay, lesbian, bisexual. And very early in my career, the AIDS community, the AIDS epidemic exploded onto the scene. I was giving lectures in Los Angeles and in New York, and those two cities were very hard hit. I was very active with the AIDS epidemic, and of course we were all very, very aware that the rampant homophobia in this country had a lot to do with the fact that gay people were not being given the services at that time that they needed. I also, after that, I think that I was the only public figure, straight person who made a lot of noise publicly about being in support of marriage equality, while a lot of people were still saying they were evolving on the issue. But I have seen something that has happened over the last few years that for any of us, we don't have to be LGBTQIA+, just to be American, just to be human, is extremely upsetting. And that is that I have always felt that gay people should have rights in America because we're all Americans. But something darker is going on right now. Right now, I see the LGBTQIA+ community as an at-risk population. And so now, and as president, I see this as a citizen, I feel it as a candidate, and I promise you I will see it as president. This is not just something where you should have equal rights. You should have equal and special protection right now. Something is going on, and it's very dark. And that which is very dark has to do with the great battle of the 21st century. In the great battle of the 21st century, the underlying philosophical and psychic contest has to do with forces of exclusion versus forces of inclusion. And some of us just think this whole diversity thing is so fabulous. Think, wow, it's so cool. Some people are black, some people are brown, some people are white, some people are gay, some people are straight, some people are non-binary, some people are asexual, some people are intersex, some people are fluid, whatever they are. What is it? Some people are Jewish, some people are Muslim, some people are Christian. How cool is this? Some of us think that's like an incredible garden. Some of us think that's an incredible panoply of diversity that will lead to the fullest actualization of what American democracy can be. But some people do not feel that way. Some people find that entire idea as psychically annihilating to their identity. And unfortunately, too many of them are active, too many of them are political, and too many of them are very clear that they will do anything, even at times violent things, to make sure that this diversity is limited. You make me president, I'll have your back. Thank you.
Great to meet you. Let's have a seat. All right. Well, thank you so much for starting us off that way.
Thank you.
So you mentioned your background. You've done a lot of work in AIDS and HIV work.
Yes, I did.
And when we started this forum, we got a lot of questions, or my mic is messed up. We got a lot of tweets with people asking about your book, Return to Love. And they were pointing out quotes where you wrote, "We are not punished for our sins, but by our sins. Sickness is not a sign of God's judgment on us, but of our judgment on ourselves." And many have believed that you've suggested that positive thought could help people get through HIV/AIDS diagnosis.
Many people believe that I was saying what?
That you've thought positive thinking could help someone with an HIV diagnosis. So first, I'd love to get your thoughts on these quotes and how your mind and your thinking has changed over the years. And also, I'd love to hear how you plan to end the HIV epidemic.
Well, first of all, my thoughts haven't changed over the years because there's nothing in what you just read that was anything to indicate anything such that if somebody had had positive thoughts, they wouldn't have gotten AIDS. I never said anything like that. There's nothing in my books like that. There's nothing in my experience, and there are many, many people on my website, Marianne 2020, in response to these really vicious smears, I must say. There is a video of some people who were there at the time. My sister had breast cancer. If anyone had suggested that there was some lack of love involved or that her thinking would fix it, that is so anathema to not only anything I've ever believed, but also anything I've ever said. This is what I believed. I believed that with love for each other, we could get through it. And with my behavior, I demonstrated that. I also would like to point out, at the beginning of that epidemic, and for years into it, there was no medicine. There was no medicine. So what I did was I founded an organization called the Los Angeles Center for Living, and then a Manhattan Center for Living, where we had non-medical support services for people with AIDS, basically, mainly AIDS, also other life-challenging illnesses. I noticed one day I walked in and I said, "Where's David? Where's John?" Because people would come during the day, they wouldn't have to experience the disease alone. They would have food, they could watch movies with people, they could have Reiki, they could have therapy, they could do grief counseling, they got massages, which was a big deal. And I would say, "Where's John?" And they would say, "Well, John isn't here today." I'd say, "Why is John not here?" "Well, he couldn't leave the house today." I'd say, "Well, how's he going to eat?" They say, "Well, I don't know." I said, "Well, we have to have somebody take him food." And there were so many of those cases that then we started an organization that was a project of the LA Center for Living called Project Angel Food, which was a Wheels on Wheels delivery service to homebound people with AIDS. And today it has served over 12 million meals.
Which is amazing.
We just had a 30th anniversary the other night.
That's amazing. So tell us more about, President Trump has put out a plan, or he says he's putting out a plan where he's going to eradicate HIV/AIDS in the next few decades. How do you plan to combat the disease?
Well, in terms of combating the disease, and we want to celebrate, of course, that a lot has been done. I think the main places where we have to worry about AIDS today, mainly, is internationally. And I think in terms of the entire LGBTQ IA plus community, as president, I would be very concerned about this threat, not only domestically, but also internationally. The United States, one of the things that I would wish for, that I would do as president, is to reclaim the moral authority of foreign policy in the United States. One of the things that would be very true when I'd be president is that right now, what President Trump is doing is limiting asylum. Not only would we not be limiting asylum if I'm president, we will be expanding asylum, particularly in the case of LGBTQIA plus people who are in danger all over the world today. And America would have such open arms, huge open arms. I'm aware of the Rainbow Railroad,
yes.
And I'm so impressed by people here and in Canada who are doing everything possible. The discrimination here, as awful as the discrimination is here, in housing, employment, in health, including, I'm very aware of the fertility issues, the reproductive rights that need to be equal, and I'm also aware of the transgender clinic here in Iowa, in Waterloo, Iowa. So Iowa has a lot to be proud of, actually. But there are people around the world who are very threatened as well and very endangered, and the United States will make a lot of noise about this when I'm president.
All right. Well, we only have a few more minutes with you, and we have a question from the audience. It comes from Dominic Conover, who resides in central Indiana, and I believe is with us tonight. He writes, "During my senior year of high school, my guidance counselor, Shelley Fitzgerald, was fired for being married to a woman she has been committed to for over 23 years. I was punished as a student for starting an organization, Shelley's Voice, to push for LGBTQ plus equality, and I wish during that time I had more people in power pushing for change alongside me. Will you make the commitment now to make protections in place to end LGBTQ plus workplace discrimination in the first 100 days of your office so that students, educators, and all employees can do their jobs without being in fear of losing them or being discriminated against for who they love?"
I absolutely will, and I'll tell you something else. If I had a cabinet secretary who made comments about LGBTQIA plus people on the job, that person will be fired the next day.
So you're saying that with your...
This stuff is very dangerous. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm Jewish, and on the night of Kristallnacht was the beginning of the Holocaust. It was called Kristallnacht. Hitler didn't just come after the Jews that night. It was the Jewish people and the gay people.
Well, Marianne Williamson, I think we are at time today. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much.
And so sorry that's short.
I appreciate it so much. God bless you. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Keenan Crow. I use the pronouns they, them, and I'm Director of Policy and Advocacy at One Iowa, an organization working to advance, empower, and improve the lives of LGBTQ Iowans statewide. I'm so proud to be able to share this stage tonight and represent queer Iowans just like myself. And I'd like to take a moment to thank our co-chairs tonight, Congressman Dave Loebsack, Congressman Abby Finkenauer, Iowa Senator Zach Walz, Iowa Senator Rob Hogue, Iowa Representative Liz Bennett, Iowa Democratic Party Chair Troy Price, Lynn County Democratic Party Chair Brett Niles, Hiawathee City Councilwoman Amy Wittgendahl, and Chair of the Iowa Stonewall Democrats, Kyla Patterson. Please join me in giving a round of applause. And now let's welcome to the stage former Congressman Joseph Sestak. Congressman, if elected president, what will you do in your first 100 days for LGBTQ Americans?
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity very much. I'm Joe Sestak, and I wore the cloth of our country for over 31 years in war and in peace. The very first ship I was on, it was a compartment filled with 60 sailors, packed like sardines, gone for months, and when we came back, everybody knew everybody else pretty darn well, even who was gay. And that's how it always was in the military, even when I was on the ground in Afghanistan for a very brief period, heading the Navy's strategic anti-terrorism unit, then came out to command an aircraft carrier battle group for the strikes. And those 5,000 sailors in that aircraft carrier, their average age, 19 and a half, they just didn't care, just as long as everyone did their job. When I came home from that war, I got out, my daughter had brain cancer. I waited as she was in a safe shelter, and then I went home to where I'd grown up, to a nearly 2-to-1 Republican district. And when I announced, the second question I had is, hey, Admiral, what do you think about don't ask, don't tell? I said, I'd gone to war with those we knew were gay. How can I come home and say they don't deserve equal rights? Even more. Even more is whenever they would come up, as I was growing up through the ranks, and one of them would come up and say, hey, Captain, I just want to let you know, all I could think in my mind was, please don't tell me you're too good. I can't afford to lose you. That's what we have to remember about the LGBTQ community and anyone else who is a marginalized community. In the military, we want the best of them all. Because yes, we want equal rights and rugged individuals to be all you might be, but when they do, they join together in that common enterprise, that common good, that the mission of the United States military is better because they're there. And that is why the first thing that must be done as president is to remove that ban on transgender persons, to have them back into the military, but also to welcome back those we unceremoniously relieved of duty, because we should not leave any person behind. But then, that's what we have to do, as was said before, to pass the Equality Act, so that everyone in civilian life can have what you get once you're in the military, because nowhere in there will anyone, because of their religious belief, be able to deny you your next job. But then we have to step back and protect the LGBTQ community. I go to a prison every year to visit my votes, but both as a congressman and also when I got out, because they didn't want the vets there to think I'd forgotten them. It's a pretty tough place there. How can we not remove that new rule there in the Bureau of Prisons, where you do not go any longer to the gender prison of the gender with which you identify? It's tough enough as it is. And then we have to make sure that we put back in those prohibitions that HUD once had, that you could not discriminate in our homeless shelter against those of the transgender community. When 1 out of 5 needs or at risk of needing homeless shelter to provide, if they can get in the same gender homeless shelter as they identify with, protection. And then what we need to do is remove those labor forces, as I can wrap this up, that actually would permit us once again to have overseas ambassadors like Jim Hormel, the first LGBTQ ambassador in America in 1999, We have to reinstitute that type of ideals to the world with our warriors of peace, our diplomats, our ambassadors having a fair share of the LGBT community. Thank you.
No, you're fine. All right. More than half of LGBTQ individuals nationwide live in states that do not legally protect them from discrimination in housing, employment, public accommodations, and much, much more. This May, the House of Representatives passed the Equality Act, a bill that would amend the Civil Rights Act to add federal non-discrimination protections for the LGBTQ community. The bill is now stalled in the Senate, obviously. As president, what would you do to support the Equality Act and ensure that all LGBTQ people in the United States are protected against that kind of discrimination?
I believe that what we really need is a president that can once again, like I did in my nearly 2-to-1 Republican district, where I was reelected with an F from the NRA, 100% from the AREL, 100% from NOW, and 95% from Human Rights Campaign. But I got reelected by 20 points without spending a penny on a campaign ad. We learned where to agree, but where we disagreed well, they still respected me. And that's what you have to do as a president this time, not just beat Mr. Trump, to have someone who can go over the heads, right to the people, to have town halls where you're open, where you can explain to them how vital it is that they have the same equality as we remove that ban that we have in the military for everyone, no matter their race, no matter their gender. Yeah. And so that's what we have to do, is go to the people and actually be out there, passing the Equality Act, but making sure that people understand out there by a leader who can actually show how it helped the military when they had them in. That's why Jim Mattis, as Secretary of Defense, was so slow to try to slow roll Mr. Trump of not having them be removed from the military. Yeah. We know their value.
And I'd like to follow up a little bit on that as well. In July 2017, obviously, President Donald Trump announced that very military ban that you just referenced, and you have come out very strongly against that. I'd also like to note that today is the 8-year anniversary of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Absolutely. So it's obvious that you want to reverse the ban. So aside from reversing that categorical ban, what else would you do to ensure that transgender individuals can serve in the military without fear of discrimination?
He's brought up a great point, because too often we pass things, and then we tend to forget what you learn in the military. Expect what you inspect. And so you need to make sure that once you do repeal a ban, or whether you do pass the Equality Act, that you actually, for example, take the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department and make sure they just don't wait for problems to come up, that they're out there making sure that they're able to see that they are occurring. In the military, what you need to do is to have those types of mandated reports that we do have, and we have them, for example, for how well today we are doing fair equality for women on sexual trauma, and it's not a good story. But the problem is, we do not take those studies, those surveys, and finding out that they're increasing every year, and then hold the admirals and generals to task. That's what you have to do, is understand you really must inspect, and when you have the results, go back and hold the military accountable when you get after the ban is repealed, for example, in transgender military personnel serving, that there is not that discrimination on those surveys. And if there is, hold them accountable, relieving for cause if you must.
Gotcha. All right, we also have an audience question. This one's from Josh Hughes of New Virginia, Iowa. And I'm going to give you some background to this as well. On August 17, 2013, James Dixon crossed the street to begin a conversation with Islan Nettles, a young transgender woman of color from Harlem. The two began flirting, and this continued until Dixon's friends started making fun of him for flirting with a trans. Dixon claims he flew into a blind fury after discovering the woman's transgender status and beat her to death on the street. Despite a detailed confession, Dixon received only 12 years in prison due to claiming that he had diminished capacity in this situation. This is a strategy known as the trans panic defense. Will you commit to outlawing the gay and trans panic defenses at the federal level and appointing judges who hold such a legal defense as unconstitutional?
Absolutely. I co-sponsored when I was in Congress the hate crime. That is hate. And that excuse is not an excuse. Look, when I was in Congress, just for an example of what must be done, you may have heard of a young man. I was in a bar after I had done an event with the LGBTQ community, talking with them. A gentleman came up and gave me a portfolio about 2 inches thick and said, I need you to read this. What happened, there was a sailor named Rasha, and 2 years earlier, he had left the military. When he was there, he was in a military working dog compound in Bahrain, where the sailors thought he was gay. So they threw him in the cage and put feces all over him, and worse. So I took that when I read it. Happened 2 years earlier, and gave it to the chief of naval operations. And they went after the individual who's right on top. But it didn't stop there. When they came back and said they had held him accountable, I said, how about the generals and the admiral who had reviewed that and done nothing? The Secretary of the Navy then took it for action. I was out of Congress before the results came back, but he talked to me and said that he would pursue it. He had retired and go after. Accountability, not for the word, but for the deed, is what is most important. And that's the shame. When someone passes something and someone has an excuse with a word, he should be or she should be held accountable for the deed that they did, egregiously did, period.
All right. Thank you so much. We are now out of time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
My name is Liz Lenz. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a columnist at the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Yeah. I am also the author of a book called Godland, but thank you all for coming out here tonight. I just want to tell you a little bit about the Cedar Rapids Gazette. They are one of the few remaining independent media organizations in the country. Yeah. And in an era where we have to have debates over fake news and facts, and we have to hear that journalists are the enemy of the people, yeah. The Cedar Rapids Gazette is dedicated to telling the stories of all Iowans, which is why we're here tonight. And I hope you all take a chance to support local journalism because it's how we fight all this. So thank you all. And on behalf of all my colleagues here who are working the event tonight, I just want to welcome you both to the audience here and everybody watching the live stream. And all right, let's get to our next candidate. It is former Vice President Joe Biden.
Hello, folks. How are you?
Mr. Biden, the question we have on deck for you is, if elected president, what should LGBTQ Americans expect from your first 100 days in office?
I thought I was supposed to make an opening statement. I'm happy to answer that question. Number one, I would undo all of the damage that President Trump has done by revoking the executive orders of my administration, our administration. Secondly, I would sign the Equality Act immediately. And thirdly, I would thank all of you and all the LGBT community for having the courage to bring us about. I get credit for coming out first for talking about legalization of same-sex marriage. Well, let me tell you something. It took no courage at all. It came down to a simple proposition. Many of you, the folks I was at Stonewall recently, who had the courage to risk not only their jobs and their futures, but in many cases their physical security and safety. They're the people we owe a gigantic debt of thanks to. I guess I don't do an opening statement. I go sit down.
All right. If you're done, we're ready for some questions.
I guess I'm done, aren't I?
Honestly, I thought you'd go a little longer, so.
All right. It was supposed to be 3 minutes, but that's okay. You're the press.
Yeah.
And you're the good press.
We want you to
all right.
Keep it snappy.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Well, I need to ask you, so in 1994, you supported legislation that increased incarceration rates and promoted more aggressive policing policies and tactics. And laws like this disproportionately affect LGBTQ people of color. So I want to know, how do you assure the American public that you won't once again support increased incarceration? And as president, will you support legislation prohibiting enforcement from targeting LGBTQ people?
Yes, I absolutely will. But let's get something straight. You're wrong about the act. That act was overwhelmingly supported by the African American community, overwhelmingly supported by the community at large. Everyone from Ted Kennedy on voted for it. It did not have mandatories in it. That's not what it was about. But the truth of the matter is, LGBTQ people are more likely to be arrested, in large part because they find themselves in circumstances where they're on the street, because they get thrown out of their homes, they don't have access to housing, they don't have access to all the benefits that everyone else does. And they find themselves the victims, victimized by what is happening when they're alone on the street, so many of them. And so, yes, and by the way, in prison, the determination should be that your sexual identity is defined by what you say it is, not what, in fact, the prison says it is. And in that case, you should be entitled also to OGBYN. Anyway, you didn't ask that question, but you're not likely to either, I guess.
I will say the increased incarceration rates thing was fact-checked, I believe, on PolitiFact. So it did increase incarceration
No, it
rates.
didn't, but go ahead.
All right.
It was not in the crime bill. What was in the crime bill was more money for state prison building, which I opposed.
All right.
The reason I voted for the whole bill, it had the Violence Against Women Act, the assault weapons ban, and a whole range of other good things.
Well, let's talk about other legislation, because in 1994, you did vote for Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and in 1996, you voted for the Defense of Marriage Act. You did vote to repeal both of those, but you have also praised Vice President Mike Pence as a decent guy.
You're a lovely person.
Just asking the questions that people want to know.
All right, fire away.
All right, so I guess it goes without saying Pence is opposed to LGBTQ rights. So the question that arises from these is, how can LGBTQ people trust that you won't compromise on issues that put them at risk in order to reach across the aisle to people like Pence?
Because the fact of the matter is, you might recall, I'm the first person nationally to come out and say in front of everyone that I didn't have to go through any period of adjustment. I came out on Meet the Press in support of gay marriage before anybody else did nationally that was on the scheme, number one. And the reason I did is I didn't have to evolve. I had a father who I remember was dropping me off when I was a senior in high school to get an application for a job at the city hall to be a lifeguard. And I saw two men in our town square dressed in their suits kiss one another and go in different directions. And I turned and looked at my dad. And he said very simply, he said, "Joey, it's simple. They love each other. Period. That's the only question. The only question." And I have been a strong, strong advocate. My son Bo, who was deceased, set up the Bo Biden Foundation to deal with children who were abused and for gay and lesbian children and transgender children. He passed the first transgender law in Delaware as Attorney General to make sure that, in fact, there was no discrimination and so on. So I'm very proud of my record.
All right.
By the way, to refer to someone on the other team, not to do anything to compromise, as being decent, it's just a matter of way in which you usually speak when you try to get things done just to talk about people. You start off, and I still call President Trump president, but I don't think he's all that decent.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just an issue because he has not been decent to a whole swath of Americans.
Nor has Trump.
Pence.
Nor has Trump.
Yes.
By the way, we should outlaw nationally the conversion therapy. There should be a law against it, period. And I proposed that for a long time.
All right. Well, we do have a question from the audience. It comes from Tracy from Des Moines, Iowa. And they write, in Iowa, Republicans have worked to defund Planned Parenthood and deny Medicaid coverage for gender-affirming surgery. So, what's your plan for ensuring the right to health care for the LGBTQ community when it comes to family planning, qualified health care for transgender people, and health care access for all?
Totally. Look, when we wrote the Violence Against Women Act, and then we came along after that and we did Obamacare. And Obamacare, you are allowed to. It does cover the surgery. It does cover transgender people. It does cover across the board. What happened is, and maybe if you take a look at it, you'll see that along came Trump, and he, by executive order, struck all of that out of the Affordable Care Act. I would reinstate it all. Every single American, every LGBTQ person, as well as anyone else, should be able to have full health care without any limitation. No doctor can deny you. No hospital can tell you can't get the service. It is simply against the law when I'm president.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, folks. And thank you for all you've done to liberate all Americans. You've done a lot. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, hi y'all. How's it going? Y'all having fun? Y'all enjoying this? Doesn't it feel nice not to only hear gay or lesbian, but to also hear trans and gender nonconforming and all these other words that make our community so magical? So it's a really, really, really special night. And I want to remind folks that you can join in this conversation live right now by tweeting or putting on Facebook or whatever you're using with the hashtag LGBTQ Forum. There are a ton of people watching. You know what? People should make note of this. Queer people will show up when you create space for them. And speaking of showing up, right now, I'd like to welcome to the stage someone I've met and looks like my brother a little bit. It's Senator Cory Booker, so welcome him. Oh. How are you? Are we hugging? Oh my God. Oh! Oh my God. What? All right, wow, a man picked me up on national television. That is a first.
And you are, first of all, congratulations. You are the first African-American to be
and he's flirting,
leading.
my God.
I'm not flirting.
Just too much. Okay, Senator Booker, let's make this back about you because I don't like talking about me, and that's why I am single. So, on the first... Y'all didn't know we could have this much fun.
Let me give you a little dating advice. It is better to be interested than interesting.
You know what? We're not going to work into Rosario here, but let's talk about queer people. Tell us what we can expect out of you in your first 100 days in office as LGBTQ people. And I'm going to let you speak to them because I'm creating a distraction.
I am so grateful. We are at a point in America where when you're running for office, it's easy to talk to people about what you will do, but this has been an issue in our nation's history, this issue of equality, this issue of justice, and we all should talk about our records. Where were we when both parties were engaging in discrimination and engaging in passing laws, suppressing freedoms and rights? Where were you during this fight? I grew up around a kitchen table with parents who talked to me openly and urgently about issues of justice in this nation. They let me know that I am here. The rights and privileges that I enjoy were fought for, not just by other black Americans, but by the full rainbow of Americans who stood up for my justice and my rights. And they had a full expectation that their sons would live the same way. And so when I began my professional career, I stepped right up and began to take on issues of LGBTQ equality. At a time that the Democratic Party has a lot of shameful history where people were denying marriage equality, where people were denying equality in the greatest patriots we know, those who are willing to put their lives on the line for their fellow Americans, and particularly in the military. When I became mayor of the city of Newark, New Jersey's largest city, the first flag I raised was the American flag. The second flag I raised for the first time in the history of my city in front of City Hall was the Pride flag. And this was This was 2006, before a lot of our national leaders had evolved. I came right out and said, I may be a mayor and have the ability to officiate weddings, but I will officiate no weddings in this city until everyone has marriage equality in the city. When I saw that we had violence against LGBTQ youth and homelessness disproportionately represented in that population, I searched the country for models that we could bring to our city and found the Hetrick Martin Institute and the Harvey Milk School in New York and took them national, brought them over the Hudson River, and started advocating and working to create safe spaces for LGBTQ youth. This has been an urgent part of my life for my entire career, because what King said is so true, that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so, as your president, a lifelong ally on these issues, we must have a comprehensive agenda starting on day one. It's making sure that the team I surround myself is diverse and representative. It includes an attorney general who will fight to protect the rights and safety of LGBTQ Americans. It includes a secretary of education who actually was in public schools and will stand up and protect every single one of our children. It means making sure that we not only remove this despicable ban on transgender Americans serving in the military, but we make sure that VA care, that we make sure veterans benefits, and so many other aspects of the military that still discriminate are done and gone. And it means, as my man stands here, I know that means my time is up.
I mean, you're out here preaching, but
I wanna just say this. There is an urgency in this moment in America. As we sit here right now, we still deal with profound injustice. There are still people who live in fear because of just of who they are. This is work that government alone can't do. We all have an obligation, no matter who we are, to deal with the persistent injustices of our country, so that when we pledge allegiance to that flag and say the words liberty and justice for all, they are not aspirational. They are the truth and the experience of every American.
All right. Well, are you ready?
I've been ready.
Oh my God. Okay, let's
This
switch.
is so exciting that we were having this forum in a presidential.
It is very
election.
exciting. Well, what I'm excited to talk to you about today, you know, one of the big things I want to bring up is we are seeing an epidemic of trans violence in this country and around the world. There are 19 trans women of color who have been murdered so far this year, and just last week, Jaliyah Jamar in Kansas City was murdered. And her death is, as I said, 19, and the Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs is saying that there are over 40 incidents of anti-LGBTQ violence just during Pride season this past year, which was also World Pride. During that period, there were 14 fatalities. So we know that we also know through all of this lens, that punishing people who commit hate crimes is not deterring them from perpetuating them. We're seeing more and more people prosecuted, but more and more people dying. You have been an advocate for stricter hate crime laws. You're pushing a lynching bill through the Senate. But I want to hear more broadly about what can you do as president to prevent trans women of color dying at this huge rate, because just throwing someone in jail after they are dead is not enough, because they are still dead.
So understand that the crisis we see in our country. Jaliyah Jamar was the 18th transgender Black American woman that has been killed this year alone. And this is not an anomaly. This year we have seen the same levels of violence in the previous years. Now look, I take again the words of Martin Luther King, who said very clearly, you can't pass legislation to make someone love me, but you can pass legislation to stop them from lynching me. Mm-hmm. You can't pass legislation to change the heartless, but to change someone's heart, but you can pass legislation to restrain the heartless. And so we have to start right there. We have to start with the protections that are not in place in this country that prevent violence and discrimination. And that's everything from things I've heard talked about already tonight, from the Equality Act all the way to having two critical leaders in my cabinet, a Secretary of Education and a Attorney General that will be focused on this issue. But it goes even deeper than that. We have a problem with violence coming from police themselves. And we know this. We may be years from Stonewall, but I saw this with my own police department, that they weren't having the training that they needed to make sure that they are not discriminating, whether it's implicit racial bias, transphobia. We have to make sure from the Justice Department that all law enforcement are seen as a safe place to go. In addition to that, we must begin to deal with the issues facing youth, because the bullying and the discrimination, 30% of LGBTQ youth, 30% right now, report not going to school, missing a day of school in the last month because of fear. And so the final thing I'll say to this question is, it's not only the legislative things that we can do, it's not only the things I can do by building a cabinet that will be focused on these issues, but it's about time that we have a woke president on these issues that every day is using their platforms to inspire and ignite justice, compassion, a more courageous empathy, a revival of civic grace, so that we see everyone for the equal dignity and equal citizenship that we all have.
Okay. I'm fanning myself because it's hot, because it's actually hot right over.
Am I making you feel uncomfortable?
You do not try this.
Okay.
All right, so one last question before we let you go. In 2014, Iowa was the first state to modernize its law on transmission of communicable diseases, getting rid of an outdated policy that criminalizes non-disclosure of an individual's HIV status. Unfortunately, many states still have these laws on the books, which can lead to the draconian prison sentences for those accused of non-disclosure. These laws have no scientific basis, discourage testing, and disproportionately impact LGBT people of color, a group that you've spoken a lot about today. As president, how would you handle this on the national stage through your policies and discussions around HIV and AIDS, and would you be willing to get rid of this idea within law?
Yes, absolutely. And so number one, we have to do things to prevent discrimination, but we still have a lot of work to do with the over 1 million people in America with HIV and AIDS. And this is the urgency that I felt when I was mayor, because this disproportionately is affecting poor populations. Some of the largest growing groups are people of color. And so as the only person in this campaign in the Senate that lives in a black and brown community below the poverty line, I know that we can do things to deal with this issue. And that means significantly increasing Ryan White funding, significantly increasing funding for housing with people with HIV and AIDS. It means making sure that we cover, through health insurance, PrEP and things that can begin to combat this disease. It means that we have a more open conversation about the urgency of being tested. It means that in our schools, we actually have science-based sexual education that talks about the transmission of STIs. You are going to cut me off.
I am.
But I just want to say this. My campaign is based on the understanding that patriotism is love of country. And you cannot love your country unless you love all of your countrymen and women. And love is not a sentiment. It is not sentimentality. As one of my great friends says, what does love look like in public? It looks like justice. And we need to understand that we cannot elevate people to positions of leadership who are not grounded in that ideal of love, because you cannot lead the people if you don't love the people. After years of a president that demeans, degrades, and divides, I will be a president that works every single day to unite, to ignite, to inspire more justice and more love in the United States of America. Thank you.
Senator Booker, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, God. Thank you.
Hello again. I hope you all are having a good time. It certainly seems as though you are. Reminder that you can jump in this conversation by tweeting us with the hashtag LGBTQ Forum. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage our next candidate, Representative Tulsi Gabbard.
Good, so good to see you. How you guys doing tonight? Aloha. Sorry, I can't give you the big Cory Booker bear hug and toss you around.
You're very good. What we really want to know
have to do with the aloha.
Yeah, in your first 100 days, though, what can LGBTQ Americans expect from you and your administration?
Yeah, well, thank you. First, I just want to say thank you all for putting on this event, for inviting us all here to be here tonight, and thanks to all of you for taking time to join us, give us the opportunity to share with you our vision for the country. I want to begin tonight, though, starting with aloha. You know, it's a word that people often associate with hello and goodbye, but it's such a powerful word that means so much more than that. It really means when I greet you with aloha, that I greet you with an open heart, with respect and with love, and a recognition that we are all connected, that we're all family, we're all children of God. And this aloha is what inspires us to come together with respect and love, to take care of one another, regardless of race or ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or gender. This aloha is what binds us all together. I've served in Congress now for nearly 7 years. Throughout my time serving in Congress, I have fought for equality for all Americans, fought for marriage equality, fought for safer schools, fought for an end to discrimination, and am proud of earning a 100% legislative score from the Human Rights Campaign. But understand, as we are gathered here tonight, that our work is far from over, that there are still many of our fellow Americans who are suffering and struggling because of ongoing discrimination in their everyday lives, whether we're talking about in the workplace, in looking for housing, or in schools, in their everyday lives. So we have our work cut out for us, and as president, I will continue this fight for equality for every single American. There are some issues that I want to cover because the challenges we face are great. Rising costs of healthcare, income inequality, lack of affordable housing, lack of access to education. There are many challenges we face, but there's one issue that is central to all the rest, to our ability to serve all of these needs, and that issue is the cost of war. I want to talk about this because not very many people do, but it is central to our ability to deliver and serve the needs of the American people. The cost of war. Since 9/11 alone, we have had over $6 trillion taken out of our pockets, out of our schools, out of our healthcare system, out of our communities to go and pay for wasteful regime change wars in other countries that have cost us thousands of American lives, that have cost us tremendously within our communities, that have increased the threat to our national security, and have caused such pain and suffering and destruction in other countries in the world. I just close this thought really quick. As president, I will end these wasteful wars. I will work to end this new Cold War and arms race. I'll make sure we don't get into any new stupid wars and instead redirect our resources towards serving the needs of the American people right here at home. Thank you.
All right. This year, the Iowa legislature and 4 other states passed bills that repealed non-discrimination policies for student groups on public college campuses. Our particular bill in Iowa was pushed over the line from a lawsuit brought by a group known as Business Leaders in Christ, who wanted to exclude a student from a leadership role simply because he was gay. These pieces of legislation allow officially recognized student groups to engage in discriminatory practices when selecting their leadership, such as excluding women, LGBTQ individuals, and people with disabilities while still receiving access to student funds. As president, what would you do to address these policies and ensure all students can be leaders in the organizations that they care about?
Thank you. You know, this is actually a question that's been raised at a few of our town halls, especially by students in colleges who are really concerned about this and who are directly impacted by it. I think this comes ultimately down to leadership and the culture of leadership that we have in this country. I'm running for president to be a leader that unifies our country and that recognizes that we all stand together as Americans, that we cannot allow this type of discrimination to continue, especially in our educational institutions, but anywhere in this country, that people are set apart or otherized and told that they can't be included. So it comes down to leadership as president to set that tone of leadership, and really this is why elections matter as well. We see how at the local level, the state level, and the national level, our engagement and participation in our democracy, in speaking up for one another and fighting for one another matters to be able to prevent these kinds of discriminatory laws from being put in place.
Great. President Trump has followed in President Obama's footsteps by calling for the decriminalization of being LGBTQ across the world. However, it is worth noting that this global campaign was announced at a time when the president was looking to use the issue as a wedge between other foreign nations. Add in Trump's silence on anti-LGBTQ efforts in countries like Chechnya. Do you think the president is actually making this global effort a priority, or is he using LGBTQ people when it only benefits him?
My reaction exactly. Look, I think this president has been known for, continues to be known for trying to divide us as a country, for trying to tear us apart as Americans, for trying to use things like sexual orientation and gender, race, religion, ethnicity as wedges to pit one group of us against the other. Why does he do these things? He does them for his own political gain. This is exactly the opposite of the values that we stand for in this country, the values that we represent, these values of love of country, love for each other, and freedom and equality for all people. And these are the kinds of values that I'll bring to the White House, the values of service above self, the values that we find at the heart of every service member, restoring those principles of integrity and honor and respect to the presidency, not only in our domestic policies here, but in the example that we set for the world. This is the kind of leadership that we need, a leadership that sends this positive message forward where we can actually be a positive force for good.
All right. We do have another audience question. This one is from Nathaniel, who lives in Des Moines. You credited some of your evolution on LGBT rights to your service in the military, where you saw the harms of authoritarian governments imposing their moral will on the population. Some have said, though, that your evolution is only skin deep, since it amounts to saying gay people should be tolerated, which is obviously different than saying it's truly okay to be gay. Does your evolution on LGB people and issues extend to transgender people and issues affecting them? And how can LGBT voters trust that you'll represent them if you are merely tolerating instead of truly accepting who they are?
My record speaks for itself. You know, you mentioned my service in the military, and throughout that service, I had the chance to serve alongside LGBT Americans and to get to know them. And in the most extreme circumstances, you know, I knew as we were deployed that they would give their life for me and I would give my life for them. We had each other's backs. There was no question of that. My record in Congress reflects the same kind of commitment that I would carry forward as president. My record in fighting for equality, my record in standing up to the Trump administration through my service on the Armed Services Committee, calling for an end to the trans ban in our military, recognizing those who are willing to put their lives on the line to serve our country. It is this stand for equality for all Americans that you will find in my record, and that you will find my commitment to carry through going forward as president, serving every single American in this country.
All right, thank you so much,
Thank
Representative.
you.
We are
Thank
out
you
of
for
time.
having me. Great to see you guys. Mahalo to you. Aloha.
Welcome back our host, Angelica Ross.
Did you miss me? Yes. Well, in case you're just joining us, we are making history tonight with the first presidential forum in 2020 exclusively focused on LGBT issues. So I hope you're out there using the hashtag LGBTQ Forum. And I'm back to remind you to use that hashtag and to register to vote. You can follow all of the LGBTQ news during this election by going to GLAAD, GLAAD.org/forum and signing up for election updates. We need to make queer voices heard next year and beyond. We can't stop. Right now, I have a surprise for you. I have a surprise guest for you all who is going to dance onto this stage. He's a dad, an activist, and the star of an Emmy-winning show. Please, from the Netflix Queer Eye and ABC's Dancing with the Stars, everyone welcome my brother, Karamo Brown.
Hello, friends. Hello, friends.
Mwah, looking good.
For you as well. First of all, I'm only dancing if you're dancing with me.
What happened?
I'm only dancing if you dance with me.
Oh, I can. What kind of dancing we doing? Oh, that ain't it?
Not this time.
That ain't it? Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you. Hello, friends. How are you all doing tonight? This is a very historic and amazing night, and I'm so proud to be here with GLAAD and all of my friends. Now, I have to tell you, it is not a secret that President Trump and his administration are not friends to the LGBT community. We all knew that, correct? Yes. It's not just Donald Trump who is the problem. It's also all of the people who are surrounding him. The rhetoric coming from the White House that is meant to divide our nation and target marginalized communities has to stop. And it's time for all marginalized communities to stand united. You know, yeah, come on, give it up, because we have to stand united. Now, the 2020 presidential election is too important for the LGBT community, for the Black community, and for those Americans like me who live at the intersection to be silent. We need to be loud and we need to be proud. I want y'all to do me a favor, and I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor. You can do better than that. Say, neighbor. We need to be loud. And we need to be proud. Good job. Now, tonight is all about giving us the tools to let our friends and family know what is at stake. Tonight's conversation is vital to the LGBT community. So please keep talking about the LGBTQ Forum all over social media. Y'all have your phones out? Good, please. Good. Oh, if y'all taking photos too, I'll pose for you. Okay. But seriously, please keep talking about this on social media. Use the hashtag LGBTQ Forum. Only together can we overcome the divisiveness that President Trump has caused. Thank you so much, friends, and continue to enjoy tonight.
Hi. It's me again. All right, are you ready to sit down with Senator Kamala Harris? Because she's here.
Hi, everybody. everybody. Hi. Hi.
Senator,
Hi.
hi, thank you. Hi, I guess the question we have on deck for you is if elected president.
When?
If elected president, what should LGBTQ Americans expect from your first 100 days in office? And I'll let you.
Right. Well, right away, getting rid of the ban on transgender men and women serving in our military. Appointing a vice president of the United States who understands and recognizes the dignity and the service and the importance of our LGBTQ community, as opposed to what we've currently got in that guy who has spent full time vilifying and spewing hate and misinformation. I will pass my PrEP Act, which is about making sure that cost is not the barrier. I will promise you that within a generation we will end HIV/AIDS. And then all of the work that we need to do in terms of passing the Equality Act, what we need to do to protect our youth, who I have worked with for years, who are fleeing places that are hostile and harmful to them, and making sure that there are federal resources put into communities that are providing a safe place for them to thrive, for them to not only live, but for them to thrive. And so those are some of my first priorities. But I will tell you, you can look at my record to know this is not new for me. My entire career, I have been a proud ally on all of these issues. And, you know, back when some Democrats were talking about civil unions, I was performing marriages in 2004 at San Francisco City Hall. That great Valentine's weekend. And you have my commitment based on my long-standing support that I will be always loud, proud, and strong as an ally as we continue with our movement. So, and I see the clock ticking. So, and bring back morality. But,
all right.
Okay, here we go.
All right, so during your time as Attorney General in California, you did send a brief seeking to deny gender affirmation surgery for trans inmates. Now, you stated that at the time you were just enforcing the existing law, but with this history, the question is, how can trans people trust you will advocate for them and not just enforce discriminatory laws?
Right, So as many of you know, I received support from the vast, I think almost every nonprofit organization in California that has been the fighters and advocates for LGBTQ rights. And when that case came up, it was because as Attorney General, I had clients, and one of them was the California Department of Corrections, and it was their policy. When I learned about what they were doing, behind the scenes, I got them to change the policy. And I commit to you that always in these systems, there are going to be these things that these agencies do, and I will commit myself always, as I always have, to dealing with it. And you don't even have, you can go back before that. When I was District Attorney of San Francisco, there was a case that had happened about a year before, the case of Gwen Norahu, that some of you may know about. And it was a tragic killing, and it's about the crimes that continue to happen against our transgender brothers and sisters. And there was this, and so what was happening, which is still happening, are these murders around the country. And what the person who did the killing would argue when they got to court after being charged, they would use this bogus thing called the gay panic defense. So as district attorney, I convened for the first time in our nation's history prosecutors from around the country to come to San Francisco, where I taught them on how they needed to defeat the gay panic defense. I've been doing this work for a long time. When I was district attorney, I created a special division of my office that was focused on LGBTQ victims of crime, and in particular did a lot of outreach around our LGBTQ victims of rape, because the system was not giving people a place to go that was safe, that was giving people dignity if they shared or told about the crimes being committed against them. And I can go on and on, but
well,
you have my
we do
full
have some more
commitment.
questions.
Okay, great.
Definitely.
Okay.
So this one is about our Supreme Courts. In 2009, Iowa was the third state in the nation to legalize same-sex marriage. Yeah. But we had to do that with the courts, and it was the same for our nation. It had to happen with the courts.
Yes.
However, the justices who voted for marriage equality here in Iowa were then voted out. They received backlash, and you can see a backlash against in our judicial system right now with the Trump administration stocking, the judiciary with very conservative justices.
Yeah.
So the question here is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to ensure the freedom of this judiciary and the rights and freedoms for all Americans?
Yeah, so again, look at my history. When I ran for Attorney General of California, that election was in 2010, so almost a decade ago. And one of the biggest issues between me and my opponent was that I was very clear that I would refuse to defend Prop 8. But I just want to give you a sense of the environment, because people have, they think, oh, California is this progressive place, right? Well, the California voters voted for Prop 8, one of the shames of who my state is. And in that election for Attorney General, my opponent campaigned on a promise to uphold Prop 8. On election night, my opponent declared his victory. That's how close the issue was. And I share that with you to tell you it wasn't necessarily a popular position when I took the position I did. But I took that position because I am committed to fighting always for equality and for fairness and against laws that are designed intentionally to deny any individual justice. And so then I was elected, as it turned out, and refused to defend Prop 8. And I am proud that after we were successful in taking it to the highest court in the land, where they challenged my decision and said I didn't have standing to refuse to defend it, we won, and immediately thereafter, I was asked to perform this first marriage after the decision of Prop 8 of Sandy Steer, and do the work of actually performing that marriage that was about saying, and I said very clearly to everybody, let the wedding bells ring. And so I will always be committed to putting in place justices.
You're talking a lot about what you've done, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, but I'm sharing what I've done.
Forward to.
No, that's fair. That's fair. But I tell you that because there are a lot of new friends here who you do not know me, and so I want to put in context the words I'm speaking about what I will do, and to let you know I'm not new to this subject, and I intend to follow through on the commitment I have long held, not just because I'm running for president.
All right.
And so it will be about putting in position in our courts people who are committed to fighting for the civil rights of all people, and not the kind of folks who, frankly, this guy in the White House has been putting in. Yeah.
Well, we have a final question, and I'll make it very short. It comes from Holly McDormand from Galesburg, Illinois, who is the mother of a trans kid. And she wants to know about correct gender markers, including for non-binary people. She wants to know what you're going to do to ensure that LGBTQ people can have their correct gender markers on personal identification forms.
Yeah.
And how are you going to make sure that they're recognized equally in all states and not force individuals to require proof of gender transition?
We're going to see video?
No, I was just pointing to the time.
Oh, okay. No video. Okay, got it. I'm there, and I've been there in terms of what we need to do in terms of IDs and how we're going to enforce it. It has to be about having a president of the United States who also understands that in her administration there must be people in every position in the cabinet who are understanding of the importance of these civil rights and equal rights. And that ranges from the people who are going to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services to who's going to be the Attorney General of the United States, who has a responsibility for enforcing the laws, including what we will pass, which is the Equality Act, to ensure that our transgender youth and our transgender men and women and every gender are protected under the law and given recognition under the law in a way that provides equality for all people. But truly for me, this is not just about one area of an administration. Because if you think about it, it relates also to who's going to be the Secretary of Labor. Part of the Equality Act is that we know we still don't have laws in America that protect people in terms of employment status. So that has to be about a Secretary of Labor. The Department of Education, obviously Betsy DeVos needs to go. But it has to be about also having a Department of Education that gives safety and protection and a sense of understanding about how we are administering these rules in schools. And I obviously could go on, and you're telling me my time is up.
Thank you so much, Senator Harris.
Thank you. And I want to just thank everybody here for your leadership, and have a great evening. Take care.
Hello, how are y'all doing? So I have a fun announcement. I heard a rumor that we're trending in the United States. We're number 1 or number 2? I don't know. We're number 1 and 2, like Beyonce says. You can be 1 and 2. So yeah. So anyway, remember to tweet along with us at home and here and give us your questions, and we'll continue this conversation going. But up next, we have our next candidate who you all may have heard of. He's a very excitable person because he's a part of our community. And I would like to introduce Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Thank you.
Oh my God. All right.
Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Mayor, our first question for tonight is, what can these people and the people at home who are LGBTQ expect from you in your first 100 days as president? And I will leave the stage so you can give that conversation to them.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for being here, and thanks for everyone for making this conversation possible, because it would have been unimaginable as a part of the presidential election process just a few years ago. Here's what you can expect from me. First of all, a president who understands that all politics is personal, not just local, but personal, precisely because of my experience as a member of the LGBTQ community. You know, this is the anniversary of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And thanks to everybody who was part of the activism that helped make that happen. I remember serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I also remember the weight lifted when that was no longer a threat to my career. And yet we know that so many Americans are still finding that they are treated as less than, including trans military members right now who were willing to put their lives on the line for this country. So one thing you can expect from me on day one is to end the war on trans Americans coming from this White House. You can obviously expect me to sign the Equality Act the moment that it hits my desk. You can also expect me to appoint an administration and a judiciary that understands that American freedom means the freedom to be who you are and love who you love. You can expect housing policies that recognize that 40% of homeless youth right now are LGBTQ, and recognize the need for equality in housing. And let me tell you, if anybody, let alone a cabinet member in my administration, spoke the way that the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development spoke yesterday about trans people, that would be their last day in federal service on my watch. You can expect an end to harmful practices like conversion therapy, and it's going to take federal leadership to make sure that that is no longer practiced in states around the country. But there's more than just the policies. There's a culture of belonging that we need to establish in this country, because right now we got, from the president on down, voices telling just about everybody for different reasons that you don't fit, because of where you came from, what you look like, how you worship, and yes, very much because of who you love or who you are. People are being told they don't belong. That will end when I am president, because we need to do the exact reverse. We got a crisis of belonging in this country. And one of the reasons I'm so proud to be a member of this community is I think we have the power to reach into our own experiences, belonging to a part of America that also cuts across all of the other different categories. I can only assume the only minority that exists in equal proportion across every ethnicity, family, and income group. We could help be that glue. And I'm seeing the body language like maybe I've gone on too long, so I'll go to my seat.
You're out of time for that.
That's what you can expect when I'm president.
Well, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. And you spoke very passionately about being a member of the community, and I'd love to start there tonight. So the FDA has recently changed their ban on blood donation on gay men or any man that has sex with men from a lifetime ban to now a 1-year ban if you've abstained from sex. What this would mean that if you became president, you would become the first man in office to not be able to give blood while serving the country that he's leading. I would like to know your thoughts on this policy, and also more broadly, how does it feel as a gay man to be running for an office in which, if you became president, you would still not be equal anymore?
I remember the first time I saw that it was an item on my schedule that I could have a chance to promote the traditional annual South Bend Mayor's Office blood drive. And it's a great thing that we do. And then I realized I can't be part of it. We still do it, and it's still a good thing. But it's an example, one of many examples of the exclusions that continue in this country. And it is one of the reasons why we need to move to something that is actually informed by medically accurate, non-discriminatory basis, whether it's things like the ban on blood or other things that relate to the treatment of HIV-positive people in America, including their opportunities to serve. We are still living with the long tail of prejudices that should have been abandoned a long time ago. And in this current environment, there is a level of hostility toward science and fact. But we need to make sure that we embrace reality, especially when our refusal to do so has harmed people because of who they are.
So what would you do with the ban, though? Would you consider, would you consider changing it from a year and eradicating it totally, or are you interested in kind of keeping it going?
I would direct the FDA to reevaluate it to make sure that what we are doing is consistent with what medicine tells us, not with old prejudices.
Okay. All right. So our next question is about Iowa. Iowa legislators recently reintroduced religious exemption legislation modeled after the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, allowing individuals to claim broad exemptions from generally applicable laws, including laws that regulate health and public safety. In the 21 states where religious exemption laws are on the books, they are often weaponized to discriminate against LGBTQ people, religious minorities, single parents, and more. And the person who really popularized this was not your friend, but the governor, Mike Pence, who you worked with a lot. That was not shady at all. I say Mike Pence, and I'm like, oh, Mike Pence. So we would like to know, how are you going to handle RFRAs on the national scale as president of the United States?
Unfortunately, I got a lot of experience dealing with this because this approach was largely pioneered in Indiana.
Yes.
And the thing that is so upsetting is that it not only is abusive toward LGBTQ Americans, but in my view, it's abusive toward the idea of faith. Faith is supposed to be about making people whole and making people better off. And when faith is used as an excuse to harm somebody, to me that is an insult to religion itself, not to mention everybody discriminated against. Now, what we saw in Indiana, what was extraordinary, was the coalition of people who rose up to push back. I was there as a mayor, but Republican mayors were there right with Democratic mayors. The business community revolted. Even NASCAR said they were disappointed. That's how you know you're getting something.
Yeah, NASCAR moved.
And so, I think this is really a rearguard action that is out of step with the American people. And as president, part of how I would push back on those efforts, needless to say, first of all, you won't see them embraced from the White House to begin with, but also, you will see a call to what the American people already know, which is even those who, and we should recognize that there are people from a certain generation who've been brought up to reject who we are. And they're on a journey, and we should help them rather than drag them into the right place. But through the lens of compassion, we have an opportunity to engage an American majority that knows that this is not the right thing to do, not for religion and certainly not for civil rights in America.
Are you fearful? You know, I think we're both from very religious backgrounds. I'm from the rural South. And, you know, I love that you're saying this. And I want to know, do you find kind of any risk there? You know, are rural or religious communities really going to get behind this idea? And do you see this as a route to really make change? Because, you know, I would want nothing more than to see the churches I grew up in really change. But do you think that's actually going to happen?
I think it can happen when we ask people to be attuned to the importance of compassion and supporting each other. You know, so often, a young person in distress, the church is one of the places they want to go for help and support. And I do think that instinct is in, I would hope that instinct is in anybody who is in a church, even if they're misguided on what their faith is telling, how their faith is telling them to treat other people. And I think in the name of that compassion, look, you'll never get everybody, and I learned that the hard way when I came out, but it is amazing how many people can move past those old harms when you appeal to what is best in them. And I think the function of leadership, especially presidential leadership, is to bring out the best of what's already somewhere inside of us.
Okay. So, one more question. So we have one question from Bryce Smith, who lives in Adel, Iowa. And they write, in many parts of rural Iowa and America, access to healthcare is scarce and hard to get to, and it's even harder and more exclusive for members of the, exclusionary for members of the LGBTQ community. As president, what will you do to not only expand healthcare across rural America, but go above and beyond to make sure LGBTQ individuals get the healthcare they need wherever they live?
So one of the things we've got to do is reinvigorate health equity as part of our healthcare strategy. Not only, you can look everywhere else to see our debate over healthcare coverage, but we've also got to make sure that we engage the capabilities of, for example, the Department of Health and Human Services, which should have a reinvigorated health equity task force. To look, we already know about pervasive racial inequities in health outcomes and healthcare. And the same is true when it comes to LGBTQ folks. We can do something about that. And I propose that we fund health equity zones that help tackle these issues. And there should be local solutions, but federal dollars, so that we specifically identify the ways in which healthcare is more difficult to access for people because of a category that they belong to. We got an obligation to do that. And if we just have a more culturally competent and frankly, just plain more diverse medical profession, a lot of these things begin to get better because there's somebody in the room to say, wait a minute, the way we're doing this isn't reaching everybody.
All right. Well, that is our time tonight. Thank you so much for being here. It was great chatting with you. Nice to see you.
It was not easy.
Hello again. Please join me in welcoming our next candidate, Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Keenan. I was at the One Iowa event. What an amazing thing back in Des Moines.
I remember that you were there. Absolutely. So please tell us, what can LGBTQ Americans expect from you and your administration in your first 100 days?
Okay, well, first I want to say what an honor it is to be here with all of you and with Mayor Pete. So let's hear it again for him. He is something to be proud of. So, what you can expect from me, and then I'll explain how I'll get you there. First of all, to pass the Marriage Equality Act in the first year. We are so close. We passed it in the House. We can get this done. Secondly, on day one, I will get rid of Betsy DeVos. We need a Secretary of Education that gets marriage equality, that gets trans rights, that understands our students and stops the bullying in our schools. The other thing I would do is ban conversion therapy. We have seen some of this in Minnesota, which you may have noted, and so I'm very focused on this issue. And then I think we need to invest in mental health and make sure that we have health care that works for our HIV community, everyone else. So how do we get there? Going back to how I got involved in LGBTQ issues, so I was the DA, the county attorney, and we had a bunch of hate crimes come into our office, and I worked on them and prosecuted them. And then when President Clinton actually introduced the Matthew Shepard bill, the hate crime bill, I was a young prosecutor, an elected official. I'd never even been to the White House, but he invited me to the White House to introduce him when he introduced the bill because of the work we'd done. And I got to meet Matthew Shepard's parents. I got to meet the investigators on the case. It's something I will never forget. They talked about how that had changed their lives and changed them forever when they started working on that case. And this is the sheriff's deputies, the police officers. So anyway, there I was, ready to go into the East Room to introduce Bill Clinton, never having been in the White House before, standing outside of the door with Bill Clinton on one side, Janet Reno on the other with my little note cards. And they start playing Hail to the Chief. The military band was there because I wanted to make it a very important event, you know, da, 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 da. And I start walking in, and all of a sudden I feel this big hand on my shoulder, and this voice says, I know you're going to do great out there, but when they play that song, I usually go first. That happened. So all I can say is that may have been my first time in the White House, but it won't be my last. Then I got the incredible honor of following that bill through. Just think, years and years later, I'm in the Senate. It had failed. Then we took over the Senate, and then we actually passed that bill, the hate crimes bill, with my vote in the U.S. Senate. From there, we had in Minnesota a divisive amendment that would have actually made it impossible to have gay marriage in our state. We used Iowa as an example, and we were able to defeat that amendment in a major election, my re-elect in 2012. And not only did we defeat it, we took back the state legislature and we passed gay marriage in Minnesota. So that's my journey. And I'm very much looking forward to carrying this to the finish line with this other work that we need to do. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So another Iowa question. This year, Iowa legislators wrote exemptions into the Iowa Civil Rights Act that would allow Medicaid to deny medically necessary surgical care to transgender Iowans. As president, what would you do to ensure that transgender Americans are able to access medically necessary care without discrimination?
Well, I would be against, and I know what you have a problem right now in your legislature and in your governor's office, right, in Iowa. And we need to fix that by winning elections, okay? So that is the first thing. And then, of course, I would reverse those kind of policies. I would not be for those kinds of policies. And I think we've got to make sure as we look at Medicaid coverage, as we look at the Affordable Care Act, we have to remember how important these protections are in the Affordable Care Act, actually, for trans people and also for HIV, LGBT, you name it. Because remember, before this, we had people being kicked off their health insurance for pre-existing conditions. And not only is this president discriminating against trans people with health care and their right to be patriotic and serve, he is also discriminating against all LGBTQ people in his efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act. I wouldn't repeal it, I would strengthen it, I would expand it.
Thank you for that. Earlier this year, Tiffany Allen and Angel Lane of Missouri were busy planning their wedding when they received some unwelcome news. A wedding dress designer not only rejected their wish to purchase their dream wedding dress, but went on to say, I know you both love each other and that feels right, but I encourage you both to reconsider. And to specifically reconsider your marriage and relationship with God. As a Midwesterner, a Christian, and a wife, how can you guarantee that LGBTQ couples can have their dream wedding without living in fear of being discriminated against simply for being who they are?
Well, if the courts won't do it, and they've been such a problem on these issues, as we know, I think the answer is the Equality Act. I think that would make a big difference in protecting people. And then as we go forward, it is appointing judges, especially judges to the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court, that respect civil rights and the law. And that's what we need to do.
Great. All right, one final question, which comes from the audience, and this actually comes from Brandon Wolf, who is an incredible activist with Equality Florida and a survivor of the Pulse nightclub massacre. Now, Brandon asks, with the rise of hate violence against LGBTQ people, specifically trans women of color, what actions will you take on guns and hate crimes in your first 100 days, and how will you ensure that law enforcement are more LGBTQ inclusive?
Okay, well, first, could Brandon, if you're out there, could you stand up? Okay, thank you. Okay, I was looking for Brandon.
Brandon is actually back here.
Brandon, you want to stand up?
Look right there.
Right
there you
over
go.
There. Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Unbelievable. I just can't. All right. So you stay out here when I tell this, because I have, when you think about what happened at that Pulse nightclub, and you think of those innocents in there, just out for the night, and you think of this criminal that went in there, someone that wanted to do them harm, someone that wanted to do them in, simply because of who they loved. And I always believe that this is a country of shared dreams, that no matter where you come from, no matter who you know, no matter who you love, that you should be able to do what you want and achieve things in the United States of America. So let's start with that. And I have been really, really proud of the way the gay community since Pulse nightclub has stood up with Everytown and with gun survivor groups and with Brady Group, and really said this is going to be one of our priorities to get gun safety legislation passed. This is near and dear to my heart. I am a former prosecutor, and I'm just imagining right now if Donald Trump was on the debate stage with me, okay? This is what I would say. I am from a proud hunting state, and by the way, so is Iowa. And I look at these proposals for universal background checks, for the assault weapon ban, for magazine limits, and I say, do they hurt my Uncle Dick in the deer stand? They do not. And I would say to him, you know what, Mr. President, after Parkland, which was after Pulse, which was after the horrible, horrible massacre that took place in that elementary school in Sandy Hook, after all of those, after the day-to-day violence that we see on our streets with a classroom of kids killed nearly every week, I would say to him, Mr. President, I sat across the table from you at the White House after Parkland. I was invited because I was a leader in these gun safety bills and the work I'd done with domestic violence. And I sat across from you and I told you that this wouldn't hurt hunters, and I said there was vast support out there, which, by the way, right now, the majority of Trump voters want to see universal background checks. The majority of hunters want to see universal background checks. And I sat across from him, and I had a piece of paper that I saved, and I used hash marks, and 9 times the President of the United States said that he wanted to change this, that he wanted to see universal background checks. You can watch the tape. It's all on video. 9 times. So what happened, and I've left that meeting, and I thought maybe we finally made a difference. And I went home, and the next day, he met with the NRA, and he folded. And I will tell you this, as your president, I will not fold. I will not fold to the NRA. I will not give in to them. Not for those victims at the Pulse nightclub, not for those victims in Midland and Odessa and in El Paso and in Dayton. And you think about that shooting in Dayton when the police showed up within 1 minute. They were there in 1 minute, yet in 30 seconds, 9 people had died. If that doesn't cry out for a change in our gun laws, I don't know what does. So the answer is now, right now, to get Mitch McConnell to call those 3 bills up for a vote, so we have a vote right now. That is the answer, and to not fold. So let's get this done. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Hi. So I've been told we're trending number 4 in the world. And I suspect that's going to get a little bit higher because the next person we have with us is Senator Elizabeth Warren. Good to see you, Senator. So, Senator, if elected president, what should LGBTQ Americans expect from the first 100 days in office?
So good to be here with you. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to show you. Dana Martin, Jasleen Ware, Ashanti Carmen, Claire Legato, Malaysia Booker, Michelle Tamika Washington, Paris Cameron, Shinell Lindsay, Chanel Spurlock, Zoe Spears, Brooklyn Lindsay, Denali Berry Stuckey, Kiki Fantroy, Pebbles LaDime Dime Doe, Tracy Single, Bailey Reeves, Beloved Slater, Jalea Jamar. 18 trans women of color who have been killed so far this year. It is time for a president of the United States of America to say their names. Equality is far off for many people in this country, but the cost of inequality for trans people, particularly trans women of color, has now reached a moment of crisis. And it is time for everyone in America to speak out on this issue. Donald Trump has a strategy. He's got a plan. His strategy is turn people against people. Turn white against black, turn straight against gay, and particularly trans, turn Christians against Muslims, turn people in urban areas against people in rural areas, turn everyone against immigrants, particularly immigrants of color. His strategy is, oh yeah, he knows what this strategy is. This strategy is one of, as long as people are turned against each other, then maybe they won't notice that Donald Trump and his corrupt buddies are robbing the rest of this country of its wealth and its dignity. Well, it's not going to work. We are going to stand together. We are going to fight together. We are going to persist together to protect every vulnerable person in this country.
Thank you so much, Senator. We're going to ask some questions.
All right. There's more.
All right. Hi.
Hi.
So, in 2012,
yes,
you wrote that you did not support gender-affirming surgery for trans inmates. In January of this year, you reversed your opinion and said you had changed on this issue, which is great. But so many people in America haven't, as you were just talking about. So here in Iowa, a Republican-led legislature changed our civil rights laws to deny trans people the right to gender-affirming surgery under Medicaid. So you just said we have to get everybody on board. How do we even do that?
So the way I think about this in America, equal means equal. And that is true everywhere. It's true in the workplace, it's true in marriage, and it's true in healthcare. And we have to be willing to get out there and fight for it. And it's true for people who are straight, it's true for people who are gay, bi, trans, intersex. It's true for everyone. And I think this is a big step forward in healthcare, that Medicare for all is not something that goes through the states. This is a direct commitment from the federal government to every single person in this country, that you will have the full range of health care services that you need. It is an affirmation that health care is a basic human right for every human being, and we will fight for it.
Senator, maybe you also saw this too. I saw in the audience a sign that said, bring back morality. And backstage, you and I were talking about faith. And what that means, and how sometimes morality means one thing, and it's often used as a weapon against LGBTQ Americans. So I want to talk about, what does being moral mean to you?
So, let me just do it out of a story in the Bible.
Preach.
Yeah, you got it. You ready for this one? Matthew 25, okay? And equivalence, what makes this such a good story is there are variations in it in the Old Testament. There are variations in other religions. But here's the basic story for any of you who don't know it. The shepherd, this is a story that has a lot of metaphor in it. The shepherd is dividing the sheep from the goats. And just inside story here, spoiler alert, the goats are going to hell.
As I think we know that cake song.
Yeah, okay. So the question is, they get to the end and they've all been divided. The goats are over here, sheep are over here. The sheep have a question for the shepherd. And the question is, why us? We look like them. What makes us different that we make it and they don't? And the answer from the shepherd is, I was hungry and he fed me. I was naked and he clothed me, thirsty and he gave me drink. I was in prison and he visited me. And the sheep say, but we never saw you. We never saw you, shepherd or Lord. We never saw you. So how did that happen? And the answer is, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of these, the least of thy brethren, ye have done it unto me. And what that passage means to me is two very important things. The first one, there is God, or goodness, or power, what word you use, in every single human being. Every one of us. And part two is that we are not called on simply to have a good heart. We're not called on to smile, to have an open mind. All good, but not enough to separate the sheep from the goats. We are called on to act. We are called on to act. To feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to give drink to the thirsty, to visit those in prison. We are called on to act, and that is what we will do.
Thank you for taking us to church, Senator.
Okay. Every day.
We have a last question I want to slip in because it's from someone in our community. Renee in Cedar Rapids asks about on October 8th, the Supreme Court will hear arguments on whether Americans are protected from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So if the court decides they are not protected, what will be your course of action to make sure LGBTQ individuals do not lose their jobs or homes?
Then we need to move in Congress. And we need to move in Congress, in my view, even before the Supreme Court acts. Remember, we always have to remember in this democracy, we've relied on our courts to protect the rights of individuals. That's what it's been about. They're there to protect the minority, to protect the individual. And yet, what's been happening to our federal courts for a long time now, it's been corporate lawyers who get appointed to those courts. It's been people who keep recognizing the rights of corporations, including the rights of corporations to have so-called religious expression, if that means cutting off health care to individuals. It's been about pro-corporate decisions and less protection for human beings. So, we're going to keep fighting that fight in the Supreme Court and with the nominees to the Supreme Court. We need somebody for President of the United States who will not name someone like Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court.
Thank you, Senator.
But let me just add, I hope we don't lose this case. I will stay on top of this. But remember, we also have a Congress that we can hold accountable. And our Congress can decide that we all are equal in this country, and that is the fight I am ready to lead.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hello. How's it going? God, y'all, isn't it hot, girl? Come on, it's hot. Woo, Jesus, it's Iowa, girl. I lived in LA and I thought that was hot. Anyway, we're at the end of tonight almost. We have one last person. Are y'all excited? Y'all loving this? All right. Well, please join me in welcoming to the stage Julian Castro, who is our former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Mr. Castro, so nice to meet you. Great to meet you. All right, so I'm gonna tee you off. I'm gonna step off stage, and I'll come back, and we'll have a quick conversation. Sound good? All right. So tell these folks what they can expect if you are elected president in your first 100 days.
All right. Good evening. First of all, let me say a huge thank you to you, Zach, and the Advocate, to GLAAD and to One Iowa, to all of the organizations who helped put this together, and to everybody who's here today. So the first thing is that on January 20th, 2021, we're going to say adios to Donald Trump. And we're going to usher in a better America because of it. I grew up with a mother who was active in the Mexican-American civil rights movement. And one of the things that is fundamental, that is core to what I believe, and I'm sure that that's true for the folks here in this room, is that we should have no second-class citizens in the United States of America. Everybody should be treated the same. Unfortunately, that's not true for the LGBTQ community. But we can make that true in the years to come. If I'm elected president, here's what I'm going to do in the first 100 days. We're going to seek to, number one, maximize executive authority. I would begin by appointing a cabinet and White House staff that looks like America and reflects the diversity of this nation, including individuals from the LGBTQ community. I would follow that up immediately on the first day with a list of all of the regulations that this president and his administration have put into place, including those that have rolled back protections of the community. And I would specifically begin with those religious exemptions that have basically licensed discrimination because they let companies and other institutions and individuals off the hook from enforcing anti-discrimination laws, whether it's in housing or employment or in healthcare or in adoptions or in the military. We're going to roll those back, go back to what we did under President Obama, and then take it to the next level. I would also appoint a task force to assist state and local authorities to investigate the deaths and injuries to transgender women of color and connect the dots of policy. For instance, ensuring that just because somebody is HIV positive, if they are in our immigration system seeking asylum, they're not separated from their family, that we treat people the same. Family love doesn't know that kind of boundary, so we shouldn't treat people differently. Of course, we also have to work with Congress, and I would work with Congress to do things like pass the Equality Act and make that a priority legislatively so that you can't be discriminated when you go look for a job or look for an apartment or a house. My goal as president would be to make sure that everybody in this country can reach their full potential. Love who they are, be who they are, enjoy this country like anybody else. That's the kind of America that we can all believe in. Gracias. Thank you. I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. Wow, thank you for keeping to time. I didn't have to come out and...
Did I hit the mark? I think I hit the mark.
Wow, that was great. Thank you.
Sorry for being so dressed down, by the way. I was at a high school earlier.
It's fine. It's so funny because I never wear a suit, so, you know, we're opposites today. Well, I want to start off with a personal question, or more of a personal story, and it comes from Family Equality Council, which is the nonprofit that works with queer families. And they shared a story on behalf of Christopher Sharp, who was a gay foster child in Texas, where his caseworker removed him from his foster family, and while driving him to a group home, they told him that unless he manned up, he would never find a forever family, since people just don't want gay kids. He was moved from group home to group home, aged out of foster care, and experienced homelessness before getting his college degree and becoming a youth advocate. Texas, your state, has a law on the books explicitly allowing foster care agencies and workers to discriminate against LGBTQ foster parents and children. As a parent, what would you do to improve the outcomes for the 1 in 5 foster youth who, like James, are LGBTQ?
Thank you very much for that question. Number one, I would prohibit that kind of discrimination in the foster care system. I would also ensure that we invest in the foster care system to make sure that it has the resources to support all of the kids who are in that system. First of all, as a whole, as folks know, who too oftentimes end up dropping out of high school or ending up homeless or in prison, we need to invest in our foster care system writ large because you can see across the board that people are not able to live up to their full potential oftentimes. So we need to improve it, but we also need to make sure that no matter what your sexual orientation or your gender identity is, that you can feel at home, that you can feel like you're loved, that you can feel like you count too, and you can be able to grow up and go on and be successful and reach your dreams, whatever those dreams are. And that begins by ensuring non-discrimination in that system.
Right. So I have to do a question about your former job because, we have a housing expert here today. And, homelessness is an issue that we have yet to solve in America and the world, and instead it's only currently growing. Multiple studies have found that within this epidemic, between 20% and 40% of all homeless youth are LGBTQ identified, while only making up a fraction of the total population, a very, very small bit. While you worked under Obama, we saw more LGBTQ protections passed than ever before. However, this situation not only stayed the same, but it grew some. As president, what are your plans to deal with this issue? Because it seems as we have more of these conversations, the more of us come out, the more homeless we're becoming.
Thank you for that question. First of all, let me say that what Ben Carson said, what was reported that he said the other day is disgusting. And we need a Secretary of Housing that can represent everybody and make sure that everybody is treated fairly. And if he can't do that, he should step down as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. When I was there, we passed the transgender rule that basically said if you seek shelter at a federally funded shelter, that you need to be accommodated according to your preference, according to what makes you comfortable. And I want to ensure that we hold on to that. So we will go back to that, offering that kind of protection. When it comes to youth homelessness, we did have a lot of opportunity to work to get those numbers down. And I have a housing plan that includes ending youth homelessness by the end of my first term. And I would do that by investing in more housing choice vouchers, rapid rehousing dollars, and other assistance that would help young people be able to find a permanent place to live. Once somebody turns 18 and they're an adult, they need a permanent place to live. Before then, they need a loving, stable place that they can live, that takes investment. That also takes making sure that we're aware of, as you said, the fact that up to 40% in some communities of youth who are homeless are from the LGBTQ community. We have to prevent that. We have to make sure that families better understand that somebody who comes out as gay or lesbian or transgender, how do we get families to better accept who their loved one is?
And are there any kind of policies you would, or not policies, but more of like, how would that conversation go in the White House? We hear so much about, I'm going to pass this legislation, I'm going to make it stronger, but what would that conversation look like when you're sitting in the White House telling, a large part of America that, like, hey, you should not be kicking out your kids, even though they are all over, TV right now?
Yeah, it begins by, I think, first of all, it begins with letting people know what the challenge is. I think most Americans don't understand that great a percentage of our youth homeless come from the LGBTQ community. Secondly, I actually believe that it starts in our education system, in our institutions, so that we have a society in the years to come that values the contributions of people from the LGBTQ community, that understands the history, that instead of seeing them too oftentimes as the other, they understand that we're fully part of one American family. And so it's housing dollars, because you asked about what does that actually mean, like just mechanically, what does that mean? It's housing dollars, but it's also understanding what we can do at the institutional level out there in our schools, working with families, challenging the nation to be more understanding and more accepting in the media today.
Okay.
Right? So much of whether people are understood or not plays itself out in American media and culture. And so I think across the board, there are ways for us to make sure that progress continues to happen.
Okay. So my final question before I let you go, it actually comes from Honduras. A year ago, we did a story at a magazine I used to run called N2 that was under Grindr, crazy. And we told the story of two young people that were married in Tijuana. There was a group of queer people that were actually getting married in Tijuana as they waited for asylum in the US. These two young people did get married and they had beautiful photos, but once they crossed, ICE detained them. They've been held for the past 10 months, they were abused, and they were just sent back to Honduras, and they are currently risking their life there and could literally die at any moment. What will you do for asylum seekers as president to make sure that queer people who are fleeing here to stay alive do not die when sent back?
There's so much. I mean, I put out an immigration plan in early April because I have a very different view of immigration from this president, and I'm not going to be afraid to articulate that vision. But with regard to asylum seekers, I would do several things. Number one, I would stop playing games with asylum seekers at the border, stop this metering, stop the MPP or Remain in Mexico program. I would, with asylum seekers, allow the reason that somebody is fleeing from domestic or gang violence, again, to be considered in somebody's asylum application, because too often times, especially transgender individuals are fleeing from that kind of threat of violence or actual violence. I would stop, as I said, separating asylum seekers because somebody is HIV positive or suspected of being that. So from day one, there are executive actions that we can take to treat people more humanely and also to allow them to make their asylum case in the first place. We also need an immigration court system that is independent of the Department of Justice, that has the judges and support staff to actually hear people's cases. I don't want people having to wait 3 or 4 years to get an answer on their asylum claim. I don't want to separate families. I don't want kids in cages. I want people to have justice and to be able to get a yes or a no. And then finally, you mentioned Honduras. I actually believe what we need to do is that we need a 21st century Marshall Plan for Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala so that people can find safety and opportunity at home instead of having to make that dangerous journey to the United States.
Well, Mr. Castro, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure chatting.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you.
Great to meet you. All right. Did y'all enjoy that? Is that good? All right. Well, on behalf of One Iowa, the Gazette, the Advocate, and GLAAD, we'd like to thank all of you for being with us tonight. And what I'd like to note is, this was only 2 hours, and within 2 hours and 10 candidates, we can't ask every question. So, on October 10th, our friends at CNN and the Human Rights Campaign will be broadcasting another forum that is 4 hours long, where they'll be asking new questions that you've submitted and making this conversation even bigger. So if you do not hear your answers tonight, you have a few weeks, so tune in there. So I'd like to close up by welcoming back our host, the incomparable Angelica Ross.
Hey. Yes, I had to switch it up real quick because we promote trying something new and switching it up in this community. Thank you very much, Zach, for announcing that other debate because I still got questions. And thank you to everyone for being here tonight. I have one more request for you, for your families, for your friends, and for everyone in your lives. Vote. Good night.